Good evening, YouTube, and everybody else watching in whatever or listening in whatever other format or platform that this eventually winds up on. I am Jimmy the Geek Aficionado, and I want to welcome you all to another episode of Comic Aficionados. And this is, it's a series that I'm really trying to develop that is, in tune to, expanding everybody's minds around the particular comic hobby. So I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you come back for more. I guess it's really where we're going with that. And that's a terrible introduction. So I'm going to just bring on our guest. Welcome, everybody. This is Mike from The Collective. If you haven't caught his YouTube channel. How are you doing, Mike?
Hey, how's it going, Jimmy?
Doing all right. So we had a little bit of a shuffle. So I was planning to do this segment with you like sometime later. But since our original plans got canceled or let's just say postponed, this seemed like a perfect opportunity to kind of segue into this little bit of magic. And
whatever works.
Yeah.
We're flexible.
We are flexible. Carlito Classico is showing up tonight. Welcome, sir. We're gonna give some time for some others to join us in the fun before we really bounce into this. And sadly, because of the short timing, I did not get the opportunity to really promote this as well as I would like. So that's unfortunate, but everybody's gonna have to catch this on the rewind.
I will say the 4 or 5 guests that watch this will get a show of their lifetime.
They really will, because this is some heavy stuff that we're talking about here.
Very heavy, yes.
And I gotta be honest with you, so I've been actually working on like the idea of having you on to talk about this for quite some time. And the reason being because this is something that I've personally wanted to have a little bit more information about, and I figured it would be a good opportunity to just kind of share and enlighten the rest of the community as well, because you have such an extensive knowledge on the subject.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've been around for almost 40. Yeah, like 40 years now in the hobby. I mean, nonstop.
That's pretty significant.
No breaks. A lot of people get into the hobby. They discover girls and cars and go to school and whatnot, and things change families. So I've been in it nonstop since 1973, actually.
That is, whoa, Jesus, longer than I've been around.
Yeah.
I think you need to rework your math there, because I'm older than 40.
Yeah. I'm 73. No.
That you look good. You look good for 73.
It's the collecting. It's you stay in dark rooms. You don't have friends.
Sniffing that newsprint, right? It's that that comic smell.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what does it. Every single time.
So what you just said is very true. I mean, you can turn this into easily a multi-part, multi-hour session. There's a lot of topics to cover, a lot of questions, I'm sure. So hey, maybe we'll do a part 2.
That is absolutely true, and it's really kind of just about where this goes. From the initial conversation, because like I said, I'm definitely looking forward to getting into the mix. We are gonna give a couple of minutes. We're gonna let some people filter in. And I'm gonna put a little bit of a advertisement out there for a second. So why don't while I do this, why don't we get a little bit more information about you? Because a lot of people, I don't think, really are aware of you. And like, I got to be honest with you, like, I'm just going to show it right now, because I did an unboxing last week of some of the great stuff that I got from you, right? That first Zod and Phantom Zone.
Yeah, I recall
Lex
those.
Luthor Origin.
Do you have that Batman 189?
You know what? I'm going to tell you where it is right now. It's right here being squished to go out to CGC. It's literally sitting on the press from this afternoon. I was pressing a couple of them to ship out. We got that nice first Black Manta.
There's the first Black Manta.
I love this one, especially the grade. But yeah, I've picked up a lot of books off of you. So why don't you tell everybody about where they can find you and where they can score some great books?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of like the emperor. I've been working in the background here, playing that manipulation game with people for decades, and I've been buying and selling books since, gosh, college, 1990. I was in the early Usenet days. Actually, I still have ads out there from 1991 in Usenet. So, like I said
Usenet.
earlier.
Holy shit.
So I go way back and been collecting now for 40 years, since 1973, before I can even read, actually. And one of the old guards, and I went through the whole gamut of fan groups, fanzines. I used to be on the Yahoo groups. There was a whole bunch of other groups, like the Saga group, which was Silver Age Golden Age back in like the mid 2000s, I think, on
Wow.
early internet days. I've been watching and lurking for many decades, and I'm aware of most of the people out there, most of the players. I did a little bit of dabbling with Luther Manning over on the Luther Manning channel a couple of years back. I said, God, we have to bring some of this out to the community. So we were doing unboxings. Maybe some of you guys know us from the unboxings we do over there on his channel. And I appear here
Never
and
seen
there.
those. Never seen those. Are those like
Really?
the ones
Wow.
where you go out and show the grades?
So I will say with a fair amount of confidence, we are the OG for the blind unboxing. So
Right?
that was an idea that I've been doing since 2001. I was like member number 6 at CGC. My first submission to CGC was, I think, early 2001. And from the get-go, I was always doing the blind unboxings because that sharpens your skills, adds a little bit of surprise and suspense to it. And we turned it
Yeah.
into a video one day, and my friend, Patrick, on his channel, Luther Manning, and people just loved it. And flattery or imitation is the best form of flattery. People always, or most of the time, will do those blind unboxings now.
I am one of those people. I think I stated it like in the first unboxing that I did. Was imitation is the
Mhm.
highest form of flattery. I just
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was like
So
that was the way to do it, and you guys have refined it. So
yeah. So we dabbled in that about, I think, 5 years ago. We started doing that, and I'm all over. You name the forum, I'm there in the background. I do about 20 or 30 shows a year as an attendee, and I ran into you at the Chicago show
yeah,
pre-COVID, like right on the cusp of
yeah, it
COVID.
really was. It was right there.
And I think you saw us on a YouTube channel. You saw me, at least, and you recognized who I was. So we chatted for a little bit. And,
Yeah, picked
you
you out of
know,
a crowd, and I was like, wait, I know that guy.
and the rest is history. I just try to keep up with all the platforms. I'm on IG now for about 6-7 months, sellingcomics.com, spelled out as one word. And then
Yeah.
I decided to finally get a website, selling comics dot with a period. Just because everyone's always asking me, do you have this book? Do you have this book? Do you have this book? So, yeah, I've been involved in the community and in the industry for decades, and you name the person, I know them. I've dealt with them, most of the big dealers, all the way up, from Heritage down to the smallest guys.
That is quite impressive. And there's not a lot of people, I think, that are in the community that have that breadth of not just knowledge, but experience and
Right.
connections,
Yeah.
which is, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to have you on the show. And
Mhm.
and for those of you who are wondering, the show that got postponed was actually a What Do You Hunt episode with Mike, with Patrick, Luther Manning, and with Anthony Reaper Tate 728, who were like three of I want to say like the original like YouTube people that I think all of us have all watched and enjoyed the videos from,
Mhm.
and learned a lot from, and then like within your guys' group there was also ETA Nick
ETA Nick and Dr. Von Schilla.
and Dr.
Yeah.
Von Schilla, yeah,
Yeah.
off go the penties.
That's Dr. John. True.
So yeah, well, you know what? Let's kind of get into it a little bit.
Mhm.
I don't want to prelude this too much, because, like I said, I mean, this is such a great topic. So I'll pad it a little bit. I'll kind of give a little bit of an explanation. So in on the CGC labels, right, and everybody's seen them now, right? Ever since the Promise collection came out, I think is when like really grabbed people's attention, right? Because that was one of the most recent pedigrees to come out that had such incredibly high grades, especially on golden age books.
Mhm.
And so on the labels of your CGC books, right, that'll be something that'll say, this X pedigree collection or from the collection of such and such person. And what I wanted to do was be able to have a conversation where we talked about what the differences were
Hmm.
between those two things, right?
Yeah.
And whether and I mean, and I think the end result is, because a lot of people are like, hey, like I've got a really nice high grade collection, like, do I have pedigree?
Hmm.
And what does the answer become to that, and can anybody achieve pedigree status? And those, like I said, those are kind of the big questions that we're looking for. So
Yeah.
I will let you kind of fire away on the definition of those.
Yeah, yeah, and I would add to that. There's levels, there's gray areas, there's different levels of that. There's the file copies. There's from the collection of, and we'll get into that. But
Yeah.
people want to know more about the pedigree, and that's the key thing. And really, pedigrees are a recent invention. I mean, even when CGC came out, there was pedigrees, but there were just little footnotes. You would see a pedigree nomenclature on a label as often as you would see like the word trimmed or tape on the inside cover. It was just a footnote, and then
Mhm.
they went to the gray black labels they had for a very short time. About, I don't know, 3 years back, they had those. They were a little too close to the conserved labels,
Conserved, yeah.
and they came out in the last year and a half, I think, with a really nice gold, the gold black ones that stand out. So really, the nomenclature for pedigrees is really recent invention. It's, the last, I don't know, it's become very prominent in the last 4 or 5 years. And if you go back for the majority of collecting the hobby, it was just an agreement between collectors that this came from the John Smith collection, or some of the bigger names like the Billy Wright pedigree or the Lamont Larson pedigree. Usually it was just a dealer found a collection of books and they said this is from the so and so collection, and everyone knew, like the Edgar Church, that
Mhm.
carried a certain amount of weight. So it was really haphazard how things were tracked. You had to figure out from little notes and stuff on the book. So pre CGC days, it was the wild, wild west, for a good 30, 40 years. And, I was part of and involved with several pedigrees to some degree. And even the Promise, I was, this much involved in the Promise pedigrees to a small degree. I talked to Lon and Ed when they first discovered it last year, but when it was just coming out, and they told me a little bit of information about it
And Lon
before it
and Ed
became.
work for Heritage, right?
Yeah, so yeah, Lon Allen, Ed Jaster, and I was working with them, selling that big collection to them that I got last year, the Bentley Hill collection.
Oh yeah,
And they
no, I want to talk about that soon because
and we'll talk about
that's
the
fantastic.
differences
Yeah.
between that and pedigrees, but they said you got to see this collection that we're going to start selling very soon. And we talked a little bit, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So yeah, CGC really brought pedigrees to the forefront.
Very cool. And so what does it take in order to have a pedigree? Like so as you noted, these
Yeah.
footnotes, right? Like where do they come from?
So there's four criteria, and like I said, it used to be the wild, wild west, and really, I think Matt Nelson is the real person who pushed this. And you go to the CGC website, and they have definitions. They have a list of the pedigrees. There's 61 recognized pedigrees right now that CGC will give you a pedigree label for, and they describe the conditions on those. But basically, a pedigree, there's four criteria. One, original owner. You have to have original owner books. You can't amass these like Nicolas Cage and buy great books from the golden age and call it the Nick Cage pedigree. You can call it Nick Cage collection, but pedigrees are original owner. They are typically golden age. And recently, in the early 90s, the White Mountain pedigree surfaced. And that was the first pedigree to have silver age books. So typically it's original owner, golden age books, sometimes silver, and they have to be of high quality. You can't have a collection of beat up, ragged out books. They're usually a certain, 9.2, 9.4 or better.
Right.
And lastly, and this is sort of a flexible criteria. The fourth criteria for pedigree status is quantity. They want to see, CGC wants to see a large number of books. There are pedigrees like the Allentown pedigree, which has I think 135 books, but it has the Captain America #1 CGC 9.8. So that gets a
Jesus.
pedigree.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the four criteria. And if you don't meet those four, it usually falls into that, category of it's a file copy or it's a collection of nomenclature.
Okay. So this is the standardized, like, right,
Yep.
segmentation, right, for pedigree to be met. And I'm sure we can probably all agree that like pedigree status is like the highest status of a book, in particular, right? In terms of like actually
Yeah.
a collection.
Yeah.
right? I mean, obviously you can have a high grade book, and it doesn't have to, be a pedigree, but to be of a pedigree, right? Meeting these four, it's like bourbon, right? For that matter, right? Like
Exactly.
it's bourbon's not all bourbons are whiskey, but not all whiskeys are bourbon, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's got to be like certain things to be met. Now, what I'm displaying on my screen here is actually from the CGC website, and it's under resources, other resources, and just click on it, and you can find the view pedigree status criteria. Now, also under there, it also gives the the information about the label itself and all of the different recognized pedigrees, right, with a little bit of background on them, and actually the distinguishing characteristics specifically that may be part of that pedigree. But if you click on that view pedigree status criteria, you get to the items that Mike just went over. So here's a good question. Now that we've discovered what an actual pedigree is, do all of the grading companies recognize the pedigrees and the same pedigrees?
Not necessarily. As you can see here, this is primarily a CGC contraption where they have published the 61 pedigrees that they recognize. And of course, they put it on the label. Prior to CGC doing this, they still put like a note on the label. I believe CBCS does the same. They don't have their pedigree label per se, but they do put notes on CBCS labels. Like I said, before the grading companies came around, I mean, people knew based upon the certain notations, and I got some examples we can show later if you want. We used to just keep the receipts, or you would have a letter. White Mountain was very popular, where if you bought a White Mountain book, you had a letterhead with the person that sold the book, the company. New England Showcase, for example, would say this is a White Mountain book. So really, it's agnostic when it comes to the grading companies as far as the pedigree. You have to know based upon the scrawling on the book or certain notations or some sort of receipt or letter where it came from. But I think there's no real contention. I wouldn't go as far as to say CBCS would take a pedigree book and go, no, this is not a pedigree, where CGC would say it. I think they would all agree to the same pedigree status for a book, label or no label.
And that seems to be one of those things that kind of would drive a book towards a CGC grading rather than, say CBCS or even, perish the thought, PGX, because you do get that, that identified status. You get that nice clean label now, right? And I think there's a lot of people who actually own pedigree books, right, that are like, oh, you know what? I'm going to send that over to CGC so I can get my really slick gold label.
Yeah.
You either do the cross grading or the upgrade for that. But that is, that is a very cool thing to be able to have. I mean, and one of the questions, that I'm going to keep asking everybody throughout the course of the night is, do you have a pedigree in your collection? I know that Biggie Shack says he's got one. It's cool, but only a 3.0. And that is absolutely okay. Because having I don't have any pedigrees in my collection. I know you have a few.
Yeah. Oh, I got a few.
You got a few.
Yeah.
So we got a couple more people in the chat. That's awesome to see.
Hey, Bub's on.
Yeah. Most important person to own my books will always be me. Hello to Kenneth Bird. And Funk Comics is up in the house, as well as Dope Comics. Now, Dope Comics. Now, this is a guy that I was not that I would totally expected to be on here, because he's got a significant Golden Age collection, and probably has a lot of knowledge himself. And I'd like to have him on at some point in the future. But let's see. So now that we've established the pedigree, so I've seen on a label from the collection of so and so. How does that work?
So what usually happens is the collection comes to typically an auction company. Back in the 90s, it was Christie's, Sotheby's. They weren't aware of the significance of the pedigree labeling, so they would often just include a letter or maybe in the catalog. And then CGC said, "Hey, we make a label with this, it becomes more popular." And you'll see quite often, like Heritage, we'll get a big collection from an estate. They'll recognize the quality, the caliber. They go to CGC and they'll say, "Hey, we should make this a pedigree status." And as a result, just kind of as a side note, Lon Allen, one of the VPs at Heritage, has found more pedigrees than anyone else has found, just because of their client base that comes. and they go through.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, they go through the auction companies. So that's how it usually works. And like I said, those 4 criteria have to be met, and it's more of like an agreement between CGC now and the big auction companies. Or, there was like the Savannah Pedigree, for example, that was found by Sheldon Drum. Somebody walked into their shop back in the 90s, I believe, and said, "Hey, this big collection of books, 40,000 books," or no, I think it was around 2010, and they said, "Yeah, we'll make it the Savannah Pedigree." So they went through Heroes Aren't Hard to Find in North Carolina, and they partnered up, got them into CGC, and got the pedigree status.
That is awesome.
Yep.
But you can have a collection that's not a pedigree.
Right. So if you go through that route and then CGC says, the average grade of these books is really kind of like, in that mid range or even low range. For example, one of the great stories I've run across, and I have a few of these books, is the IRS collection. So there was this savvy guy, and you can look it up. There's tons of these on eBay for sale. This savvy computer programmer was working for the Department of Revenue, I think in Colorado. It wasn't the IRS, but Department of Revenue. He pilfered money by taking dead taxpayers' refund checks, and he rerouted them to himself, cashed them, and he spent upwards of $500,000 of revenue to buy comics and put into his collection. Eventually, they caught on to him, arrested him, and a local company called RTS, I guess, bought out the comics to kind of offset the legal fees for this guy. And they said, well, the condition on these books is really bad. I mean, he bought anything and everything. So first of all, it wasn't original owner books. He did buy Golden Age, so they were old books, and there were a lot of books, but they weren't original owner, and the condition wasn't there. But it was a cool idea that we can monopolize this and say we're going to call it the IRS collection. And as you probably know, Jimmy, I had the same situation last year. I was fortunate enough to stumble across locally the Pinnacle Hill collection books, which the claim to fame to that collection was the best known copy of Detective Comics 27 was in that collection. They had an 8.0 Detective 27 back in 2010. And the owner of those books had passed away. His inheritor came to a local comic shop and said, I got more of these Golden Age books. What do I do with them? And I got wind of it and helped them take them to Heritage. So they, again, were bought secondhand. They were Golden Age, high condition, high grades, extensive collection, but not original owner books. So they called it the Pinnacle Hill collection, and it wasn't a pedigree.
Okay. So in order to register as a collection, does it have to be Golden Age, or does it have to just include Golden Age? Right, like kind of where's that dividing line?
Yeah, so one of the 4 criteria is it has to be vintage, and there's no real clear line. Like I said, the White Mountain pedigree was the first one that actually included Silver Age. When collecting really started taking off in the 60s, there was a lot of copies of books from 1960 onwards. As much as you want to think, a lot of these Marvel Silver Age books are very, very plentiful. There's thousands of copies out there. So to find a collection, original owner collections, like for example, Chuck Rosansky found the Mile High 2 collection. That is not a pedigree. That's a collection. And that was primarily 1970 bronze books. And he found, and he has a story about this, but Chuck's find was, I think, upwards, I want to say 1 million copies. I mean, just a huge warehouse find he purchased. But again, they weren't vintage. I guess you can say they were actually from a publisher. There was a big story behind that about some of the legalities of how the publisher acquired the books, but it wasn't a old 40s, 50s, early 60s. I think there were some books in there from the late 60s onwards. And again, that vintage criteria was not met, but it's kind of a vague area. I know there's a couple of collections out there, a couple of pedigrees, I should say, that do dip into the 1970s, but they have their beginnings like in 1940. So the entire breadth of the pedigree spans those years. So when you get into the Silver Age, then the pedigree status kind of begins to wane.
Okay. So a guy like me, right, who's curating a nice collection, and I want to get a collection status. I want to be able to go, this is from the Geek Aficionado collection, right? I want to be able to go to CGC and say, hey, I want that on the label of all my books that I send to you. What are the criteria that needs to be met for that? Do they, does it have to be a whole lot taken at auction that, the auction house brings over? Do I have to go to CGC and say, hey, I've got, these 1,000 number of books, you know, and they're all high
Yeah.
quality. How does somebody go about getting that status of the
So
collection?
yeah, so that's kind of, I think that's kind of a business agreement, kind of a gentleman's agreement, more like that. In that I've seen this done many a times where you go to like a Comic Link or a Heritage, and they say, "I've got this significant collection. I want to get it graded, and could we have a note put on the label that says from the so and so collection, like the Nicolas Cage collection,
Yeah.
the John Fantuccio collection, the Don and Maggie Thompson collection. There's tons of them out there." And CGC will usually say, "Yeah, yeah, sure, we could do that." So I guess it's working with the auction companies that then work with CGC that have the agreement. And I'm sure there's a criteria of, if we're going to make a special custom label in a sense, we
Yeah.
want to see a certain quantity and a certain quality of those books. So again, they look at those 4 criteria and they go, "Yeah, I think we'll do that." So you see these double labels a lot. I have a number of these where you'll see the most recent one was the Black Cat collection that went through Heritage.
Oh yeah, that was
There
we
were
were actually talking about that on
several,
the last show. Yeah.
yeah, there were several Pedigree books. I mean, I had one I bought, which was the Northford Pedigree, but then it's marked the Black Cat collection. So you have these dual labels of Pedigree and collection status on both, which would
Wow.
fit just fine.
That is that's cool, right?
Yeah.
Like that's something I would be excited about. Like number one, having a pedigree, in my collection, but then like my
Mhm.
collection being able to hit collection status, have that pedigree in there as well, right?
Yeah. So I think if you buy enough Pedigree books and amass enough, you can one day take them to Heritage or Comic Link or Comic Connect and say, "Hey guys, I've got this many Pedigree books in my collection, but the overall grouping is significant enough." Like say you complete Marvel Mystery Comics and you got a handful of Pedigree books in there, they will put your name like Nicolas Cage on the label to say this is
Right.
from the Jimmy, the Geek Aficionado collection.
You know what? I mean, because that's my goal right now. Right? Like that is going to be like my absolute goal going forward is like I want to get collection status on my stuff, right? So that like when
Mhm.
when it comes time to roll this this beautiful amassed collection over into retirement funds,
Yeah.
right? I want it to stand for something.
Yeah.
We got a few more people showing up in here. We got Comic Mag Musings. How you doing, Bill? And well, Bub's here. IRS has lots of my stuff. Yeah, IRS has a lot of my money too. Cantonese Comic Kid. Happy birthday, brother. He just had a birthday not that long ago. A little fun over in Florida.
Nice.
So what we've established is pedigree requires specific criteria to be met, 4 specific criteria
Mhm.
to be met. And all that information is available on the CGC website. In order to get a collection status, right, it just has to be of significant quality and quantity.
Right.
What we've gone through, and working through an auction house can help you to obtain that.
Mhm.
So you had when we were talking about this, you had mentioned that you had some resources that you were going to
Mhm.
share.
Yeah.
What you got?
So let's do a little show and tell right here. So let me
Absolutely.
see if I can bring up a couple of these, and we'll start with, let's go here in the beginning. Let's see if I can recall which pedigree these are from.
Let's pop that up.
Yes, I know what this one is. So, like I said, pedigrees are more of a recent invention. I mean, really, not until 2000, I want to say like 2010 or 11, did you actually see? No, actually, it was when they first had the that black and white label. That was like only like 4 or 5 years back.
Yeah.
So in the early 2000s, a pedigree book, if you had a pedigree book, slabbed, it would have a little note at the top that would say the pedigree name, but it might as well also say the book was trimmed or had tape or whatever. So it
Yeah.
was easily missed. There was no difference in the color of the label. So, so you're going backwards in time. You had the black and gold in the last year and a half. You had the white and the black, I think 3-4 years back. And then back to like early 2000s, you just had a little note on the label. So prior to 2000, 2001, when CGC came around, this is what you would find with a pedigree book. So these 2 books right here are from the Spokane collection. So all
This
these
is what
books are my
Suspense 20 and what's the other
8,
one there? And
number
8.
8. Yeah. So I bought these from Vinny Zerzolo. So you know Vinny from Metropolis and Comic Connect. So this is before Vinny and Steven Fischler joined forces and they had their Metropolis comics. He did sell some of these books through Metropolis, and let me show you how I know these are Pedigree books. Number one, I bought them from the ad myself, and number two, the ad. And let's see, here's the other thing I want to share. There it is. The ad was in Comic Bar's Guide, and it said, these are the Pedigree books that are part of the Spokane collection. And on the back of the book, there was a little label. So if you pop that share up there.
Throw that up. So I was having a little bit of technical difficulties here for a minute.
You can see in the olden days, this goes way, way back. This was 1997. I paid a princely sum, I think, of $140 and $110 for these two books.
Wow.
But that label at the top was on the actual comic bag. So I was smart enough to say, you know what? This is a Pedigree book. I'm going to keep the label. I peeled it off and I kept the receipt. And this is how things prior to 2000 were done with Pedigree books. You had little letters and labels and stuff that you kind of used to track where these were bought and sold from.
So let's zoom in on that a little bit so we can actually kind of detail that. So what's the area that we're looking for here? Okay, so we got Spokane copy in a label from Metropolis
number 8. And then I have the receipt. And this was before Vinny. He was just starting to work with Steven Fischler at Metropolis, but he had his own business called Vincent's Collectibles. So here I have the receipt, and there's the two books that I bought from him with my address covered up underneath.
Absolutely.
So that's about all you need. I mean, really, to get that designation of a Pedigree status. I mean, there's definitely books that have that look and feel, like the church copies, the Mile High copies have a very distinctive smell to them. I was lucky enough to come across one of those recently locally, raw, and it had a receipt from Chuck Rosansky in that book that said, this is from the Mile High collection. And it really had this very fresh, distinct, not that typical comic book smell. So you don't need to have receipts.
So what is this distinct smell? Like that it doesn't smell like old newsprint?
It smelled like a brand new comic.
Fresh?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it was weird. It was like you have a book that's 80 years old, but it smelled like a book from last month with that newer, heavier cardstock and print. It didn't have that musty, dusty kind of a smell that the older books tend to have that we all enjoy.
I read the article, the story that Chuck had put on, like Chuck, the original comic blogger before there was blogs. On his website, he's got a whole bunch of stories about, a lot of stuff that has to do with the hobby, but like stories primarily from his experience as a dealer. And one of those multi-part stories was about how he found the Edgar Church collection, and I'll never forget that story, at least not until I get senile. But the one of the cool things about it was it was like all down in basically in a basement, right? And just kind of like in stacks everywhere. Right. It was like all like in closets and in sideboards and just everywhere. There was just stacks of comics. Right. And and he goes into the description, but he never makes the statement about how fresh those comics smelled. Right. And we're all familiar with how comics smell, after a period of time. It's not quite as fragrant as fish, but it definitely has its own distinction, especially the more acrid ones. So that's powerful insight, knowing that something from the Edgar Church collection still to this day smells nice and minty fresh.
Yeah. I've actually held them in my own hands. As of last year, I had some raw copies. Like I said, they definitely smell different. It was probably the closest I can explain it is like brand new comic smell. It didn't have that typical silver golden age book. It was 1941, and it was just like it was printed yesterday.
Wow, that is crazy. So what do we have here next?
So and back in the pre-2000 CGC era, you would have these books that you pick up and you would say, "Wow, these look really like they were just made yesterday, or printed yesterday." So this was a group of books that I bought off eBay back in the late 90s. And what I noticed was, and I'll zoom in on one of them right here. You can see over here this arrival date, which I believe is probably upside down, or I don't know, it's a coded arrival date. Grease pencil. And I bought a bunch of these books off of eBay, and all of a sudden the seller just disappeared. Well, come to find out, about 2 months afterwards, Brian Peets at A1 Comics in California was also buying these books from this eBay seller, and he recognized this was a Pedigree collection. So he quickly contacted the seller, and he bought all 7,000 issues, and they became known as the River City books. So you can see this one over here, this Black Magic. It's got the same location, the 5730 at the top. I saw this at Dale Roberts' booth. I think I actually got this at the Chicago show when I saw you 2 years ago, Jimmy. And I go, oh my God, this is a River City book. And Dale's like, yeah, it is. And I go, I've got like 100 of these books in my collection. And yeah, so once Brian got a hold of it, he went to CGC and said, I think this should be a Pedigree. And sure enough, it met the criteria. I connected the dots and said, I got some of those same books. And now I know what happened to them. Brian bought them all up. But if you look at these, they got that same marking. So some of the pedigrees you can identify by these markings, just by the fact that they have that distinctive notes, or in the case of the Mile Highs, they have that distinctive smell.
Wow. So I apologize if you're watching it, if you're hearing Mike break up a little bit. I am having a little bit of trouble with my internet. I have kids who are online gaming right now while I'm running my stream,
Oh no.
and it's killing me. I don't know if it's coming through fluid on your end, and I really hope that it is. It's chopped up a little bit on my end, so we're gonna keep pushing through. I've sent my other kids to go attack them.
There you go. Out in droves.
Looks like we might be having a little bit of a different issue because he's not online. Anyway, so we'll keep pushing through it. Lost my train of thought a little bit there. Okay. So there are a lot of distinguishing marks that happen on these Pedigree books, right? But it's not always something, right?
Right.
And like one of the things that I think every collector should take from this is that, like, if you have a nice copy of something, like, go back and look in your collection, right? And start looking for some of these distinguishing marks. You may have Pedigree books in your collection because some of these, like, they got sold off before they made it to Pedigree status, right? Or before they were discovered in these large
That was
collections.
pretty common. A lot of these pedigrees, if you look at the history and the pedigrees on the CGC site, the Ohio pedigree, for example, they sold about half the books before they realized what they really had. I mean, the guy was just buying the books, small groups at a time, and then one day stepped back and said, oh my God, I've been buying these books for years, Nelson Dodds. And he didn't know he had already purchased most of these books from a recognizable pedigree.
And I'm looking at the Ohio pedigree right now, and it's just it mentions distributor codes written on the front covers. So how is it in the pictures that they're showing aren't like, it's obviously not, specifically the same, but there is a C notated on it. But is there, like, how would you distinguish, because I mean, I've had books that have grease pencil on them, and sometimes, like as a cleaner, like, I'll clean the grease pencil stuff off, right? Because, it's ugly when you're going to put it on there. But it's one of those things where you don't want to be the guy who's like cleaning off, the pedigree insignia, or indication, and then, you don't get that opportunity. So how, some of these, like I said, are more distinguishable, but like with the Ohio, right? Like, how do you really tell?
Yeah. I mean, good question. That's a great example because I just got back a couple of pedigree books from the Ohio collection just a few weeks ago. I shared one right here, and I had bought this book about a year ago, and I recognized this notation here, the C/7/1, and this is all I had to go by. So when I submitted the book to CGC, I marked down a note that said, this is, I believe, an Ohio pedigree, and CGC agreed, and they put the gold and black label on. So I got this back just about a week and a half ago. Yeah, so sometimes it comes down to, and like you said, if I were to erase that mark, yeah, I don't think you could really tell. I mean, it does have white pages. It's not extremely high grade. It is, for the era, I believe this is the third best known copy of this book, Hit Comics. But it would be a hard sell. Sometimes it comes down to just a hunch. I have another one here. Let me share this one too. The Big Apple pedigree. So another book that I picked up last year. I thought, I think this might be a unique pedigree marking. So I marked it on the notation or the comments when I submitted the book to CGC. And I said, I believe this is a Big Apple pedigree. Here it is right on the screen. And what clued me in is this looks like a JM mark.
Mm-hmm.
And all I had to say to CGC is I believe this is a Big Apple pedigree. And again, they agreed. They gave
Now
me the gold and black label.
There's when you're submitting the books to CGC on the form, there's an option for a checkbox that says pedigree and then some notation there, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yep. So
it's a beautiful book.
I talked to, and this, I think this is like the third best known copy of this book.
Prize Comics number 33. Yeah, I mean, what's the year on that? 1950.
This is
1943. Yeah.
43.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. So when I was talking to Ed Jastor and Lon Allen from Heritage last year, they came up here, and they also recommend pedigree status for books. So if they see a book that comes in through a big collection they're selling, they're well versed enough to say, hey, this is a pedigree. In between people like those guys, Matt Nelson at Heritage or at CGC and a few other graders, they have enough experience. Matt says, Matt Nelson from CGC, he claims he can tell us a Edgar Church book based upon the smell alone. So they see enough of these books, they can identify pretty quick.
Just based on the smell.
Yeah. Wow. I say this too is, and I'll show this here. I got a comic here in my hand. As we're preparing for the show and we were talking about it, I pulled some books up, and I'll hold this up to the camera.
All right, let's do this.
Let's make me full screen. Let me see if I can get this thing to like focus. Is it gonna focus?
Back it up.
Yeah. Yep. Hold on. Let me get my camera. There we go.
There we go.
So
nice.
You see this letter D right there in pencil on the U?
Yep, on the U.
Get the reflection. Yep. That letter D. So I believe this is a Davis Crippen copy of this book.
Really?
So I think this is a pedigree
Davis Crippen copy. D. Yeah.
Yep. And if I look at the CGC site, it looks very similar. And I did buy that book. This is Suspense Comics number 10. I give it about a 9.2. It's very high grade. So It fits the criteria. It's a 1950s book. It's 9.2. It has that little D on there, which matches up the Davis Crippen. And I didn't know I had that until about an hour ago. I mean, I knew I had the book, but the pedigree, I was like, wait a minute, I think this is a Davis Crippen pedigree. So, like you said earlier, I think people have some of these books in their collection and you just don't know. I think if you got a golden age book that's very high grade, that should be the big clue right there that it could potentially be a pedigree book.
Right. Because there's very few of these that actually extend into the Silver Age, right?
Correct. Yeah. Once you get into the Silver Age, most of that was just distributor markings, all of that stuff. They use the newsstands to track their books. So, I would, even if you got like a supposed pedigree from the late 60s, early 70s, you're not going to get that pedigree status unless it came from one of the big, the White Mountain or Savannas that spanned multiple decades.
Right. Now that makes sense. So I was looking through this list here, and I was actually having this conversation with one of my customers yesterday. So there's a pedigree called the Curator, and it's considered one of the best Silver Age collections ever discovered. And the X-Men 1 was graded out as a 9.8, and my customer actually was the owner of that. He's the one that actually had it graded. And John Hauser is the person who found these books. And he, I actually do shows with him every couple of weeks. He used to have a store up in Milwaukee.
Yeah, he's in your area.
Yeah. So he actually had let those go before he had an opportunity to have them like identified, right? So like most of them are kind of just into the wind, right? Exactly. And the only thing that's really kind of identifies it is and there's not like a whole lot of like designation for that particular one either. Yeah.
Like I said earlier, a lot of the times it comes down to, just keeping documentation, having the receipts. There's I'll throw this up here. I'll share this too. White Mountain, a lot of the White Mountain books did not have any real distinguishing marks.
We're losing you a little bit. Not sure if that's on my end. Hopefully we can get him back. Mike, if you can hear me, you're frozen. Well, this is unfortunate. We got him mid-sentence. So we'll try and get him back on here in just a second. But hey, if you're watching, if you're listening, and you've got any of these books, any Pedigree books in your collection, or anything denoted as a collection, go ahead and throw it into the chat or leave it into the comments, and let us know, what you got, and we'd like to hear about those. Anything that you might actually have from one of those, and as we stated before, there's 61 discovered pedigrees actually recognized by CGC and potentially CBCS as well. Some of those, as we said, were a little bit more obvious to note, and some that were not quite as much. But while we wait for Mike to pop back in, you know what? I think we'll segue to a little bit of an unboxing, just because we like to show off some comics in this particular show. Got something here from this is from Super World Comics. They had claim sales that they normally do on a couple of days out of the week. And they had a little book that I needed in order to complete a particular run. Go into that, and just a really nice copy of it too, for a really good price. So made it a little bit easier for the purchasing aspect of that. Let's see, what do we got? We got tape and cardboard. That's always a good sign. Yeah, let's just kind of cut to the chase and get the X-Acto out. All right. Oh, here we go. Yeah, this thing does look nice. So this was, I want to say it was identified as like a 6.5 or something like that, but it's Flash number 122, and that is the first appearance of the top. So going after my Flash Rogues gallery, trying to knock those out. Got that one safely secured. So we're going to get that graded out. I still love getting these. I mean, like these Flashes, not Golden Age, but these Flash comics from the Silver Age, and they're still 10 cents, right? So that's a nice pickup. Another one of the Flash Rogues off the list, and it looks like we've got Mike back. So we're gonna bring him back in here.
I was giving out privileged information. Matt Nelson just cut me off right there.
Is that what it was? Like, go. Gotta go.
Can't talk about that. Yeah. So I forgot where we left off.
I forgot as well. So you know what? We'll just try to kind of pick it up as we go.
No problem. And I was about to say you were talking about, identifying some of these books and what if you erased the marks or whatever. But, I had another example I just threw up on the screen there of the White Mountain Pedigree, which really didn't have any distinguishing marks on the comics. Mm-hmm. So when one of the, I guess, comic shops that bought some of those books back in the 90s, they were sold through, I think, Christie's auction house. This is pre-Heritage Days.
Okay.
They started, including these handwritten notes that said this book is from the White Mountain Pedigree. So okay. I've got, what is this issue here? Suspense number 15 that came with this handwritten letter. So this is how you identified some of the pedigrees if they were dispersed in various ways through various shops and stores, which was very common back then. People didn't really care about the pedigree. They just knew it was a special collection. So some of them are lost to the wind. We don't know where the book came from. All you know is it's a great looking golden age book.
Right. This really reminds me of it's like a chain of evidence, right? Like, a
Mhm.
chain of custody on evidence, right? Where it's got to
Yeah,
got to fill out a form as it changes hands, right? It's got to come from a reputable source, otherwise it's inadmissible.
exactly. Yeah.
I've actually got something I'm going to grab right over here
Mhm.
that a customer gave me, and this was like one of those, just another one of those questions that just really comes up. So he got these books, and what he gave me was like a whole set of like demons, right?
Mhm.
And what they have on the back of them, because I want to see. So apparently it was like an estate lawyer that was selling them, right? For the estate. But it's the I'm gonna zoom in on myself here, and it says the Edgewater Road Collection,
Right.
Savannah, Georgia. Get that.
Yep.
And so he's asking me, right? Can I submit these? Man, I really you get the idea, right? It's a little sticker on there.
Yep.
Can I submit these to CGC and get like collection status on
Mhm.
that, right? Because initially he was asking for pedigree, and I explained to him, I was like, no, there's no way for that to be pedigree unless it's already an established pedigree, in there, which I don't think. I mean, Edgewater for some reason sounded familiar. I don't know. I don't remember exactly why, but I don't think it's one of the pedigrees, is it?
No, no, it's
Yeah,
not.
yeah. So the question is like, does how did how does something like this kind of fall into that, right? Because I'm sending in this group. Do I send in just like a letter and say, hey, this is because like I've got a letter like that that he provided me like from the estate lawyer and all that about the purchase that he
Mhm.
made. Is that something that you're aware of that can be turned in to
Yeah.
get that kind of.
Yeah, that usually falls into that category of, from the collection of,
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
being the demon, it's a Bronze Age book. They probably wouldn't say if you have some late or early Silver, late Golden Age books in that same grouping, yeah,
Hmm.
we'll lump them all as a pedigree. But if it's just basically bronze and newer books, they're gonna say, "Nah, they're not gonna do that." And, it's very common, seeing that notation. I
Yeah,
just shared up an example here on the screen too. This is from the Don Rosa collection. So I have a bunch of books from Don, and what he did is he actually made these certificates, included them with the books.
right.
And I don't recall if he went through Heritage or not, but he sold these. And by the way, Don's still alive. I've talked to Don a few times. We have some funny stories to exchange. But again, going through the auction companies, they put that little note at the top from the Don Rosa collection. Now, I think he didn't get pedigree status because this book here specifically is, in the 70s, 79 to be exact.
Yeah, super
Um,
late. Yeah,
he didn't have many books that were, golden age. I think he kept most of those books, Silver Age too, and he wanted to sell off his later books. So it didn't meet that criteria of, the vintage era, but it was still a vast collection, very high grade collection. And CGC at least put that note on the cover. So the best you could hope for like the demon books is
yeah,
to get that note if you had enough books to submit.
right. Yeah, and I mean, like, it's almost the entire run. I
Mhm.
want to say is what he was able to get, and it did have that particular notation. And then like I was at, and I'm remiss for not grabbing this. I was at Torpedo Comics
Mhm.
2 years ago, and picked up a couple of Hawkmans,
Mhm.
right, to finish off my run. And like apparently there was a gentleman who who had passed away recently, and they had gotten his entire collection to resell, and it was like a whole like it was a really nice write up in there about who he was, who he was as a collector and everything. And these books were from that collection. Now, that was just really cool that they number one that they did that,
Mhm.
is kind of like honoring him, and and being able to sell that, and including that, so like those become those things, where it's like, okay, does this help qualify that, in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah. Yeah. So, on that topic, I took a running shot at coming up with a pedigree myself back in 2000, I think 4 or 5. So,
Yeah.
this was something that I came up with, me and a few other people on eBay, because we noticed, and this was a write up of the collection. It was sold on eBay, and a dealer from Elmhurst, Illinois had a large number of books. And in
Hmm.
talking to the guy, his name was Glenn Altvar. Glenn said he got a big, big collection of comic books and about 7,000 comics. And I picked about 200 books up, and they were from roughly 56 through, I think I said here, 7,000 comics. Yeah, late 50s, I think 56 through like about 1980.
Hmm.
He had like showcase number 3 up to Hulk 181, beautiful copies. And I decided to call it the Elmhurst Collection. I probably should have called it the Elmhurst Pedigree, but not being totally clear. And every book that I sold after I kept the ones I wanted to keep, I included the certificate to kind of again have that breadcrumb trail. Interestingly enough, you can Google the Elmhurst Collection, and there are a number of these books that have been sold through Heritage. There's a few on a couple of websites to this day still, and people have this certificate with the book. Now,
Interesting.
CGC was just starting up, and I could have petitioned them to say, hey, guys, make this a pedigree. Unfortunately, somebody beat me to the punch and bought this collection out from this guy. I got about 200 books into it, and then it just disappeared.
Wow. Well, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yep.
It's funny. It's like I've heard about a couple of different collections, in my area. Like one that it was just like I can't even go into it. It's just like I can't even get access to the people who actually have it. Because
Mhm.
like there's a member of the family who's kind of like I don't want to be involved and everything, and the rest of them are selling stuff off, and I'm like, where is it? Where are the sales? Because like I know the books and they haven't gone up for sale. Where are they?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what are you
Yeah.
doing with it? It's like there's people like I want to be able to talk to and educate and go like, look, like you have your father's collection,
Mhm.
from where he started way back, right? Because we're not at that age, where we would have been buying the stuff off the rack,
True.
so finding these, right, just really kind of becomes a point of conversation with
Right.
people to let them know. Even if you can't buy it off of them or whatever the case is, because sometimes those collections are just so massive, right, in
Yeah.
terms of like the values, and I know there was like All Star Comics, 1, 3,
Wow.
8, it's like all that,
Wow.
and they're like in great shape,
Wow.
because the one brother's sending the other brother pictures and he's like giving him the bird, you know, because the one guy is a comic fan. He's like, yeah, I can't be party to selling the stuff off, but it's just rough, right?
Yeah.
To be involved in that. Like I wouldn't want to be involved in all that kind of family drama after something like that happens. But being somebody who can provide guidance, right, that's a wholly different story.
Yeah.
And which is something that you actually had the opportunity to do with that
Mhm.
group of MLJ books.
Pinnacle Hill.
There
Yeah.
was the Pinnacle Hill collection,
Yep.
right? Let's hear a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
more about that.
Yeah, so again, I was just working at helping this local comic shop guy with some stuff, and one day he said, I don't know what these books are." This guy walked in with a bunch of Golden Age books. I don't recognize the titles. Black Hood, Top Notch, Shield Wizard, Zip, and I said, "Wow!" I said, "Those are some pretty obscure Archie pre-hero, or pre-Archie hero books." And he brought the books into the shop one day, and I took a look, and I said, "Oh my god, these things are just amazing." I mean, he had a complete run. Condition was kind of all over the place. Some were pretty nice, but some were pretty beat up. So it wasn't original owner collections. I recognized instantly they were bought secondhand. But the weird part is it was just the pre-Archie hero. And I go, this was a nephew. I said, "Did your uncle who owned the books originally have more?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, he did. He sold them through Heritage." And I connected the dots, and then I realized these were the remaining books that Heritage didn't get back in 2010 from the Pinnacle Hill collection. So I contacted Ed and Lon at Heritage, and they said, "We recall those books. We know those books from 10 years ago." So they flew up, took a look, and they said, "We'll consign these through Heritage," and then it became the Pinnacle Hill collection. So again, they weren't a pedigree status. There were a few pedigree books in there, but it just got the nomenclature, the collection. And the funny thing was, I was talking to Lon Allen, and I said, "So why did you call it the Pinnacle Hill?" Because there was a street locally called the Pinnacle Hill Street. And I
Right. This
said,
is
"Was
in
this
Buffalo, right?
Rochester, New York?"
Rochester.
And I
Okay.
said, "Well, did the guy live on Pinnacle Hill Street?" And Lon looked at me and he goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, that's a local road." And he goes, "No, we just made up that name." He said, because pinnacle means like the apex or peak,
Yeah.
and we thought hill like a location, so it's kind of like an adjective and a noun, and like cosmic aeroplane pedigree, or he just kind of came up with this, and that's when he told me about the promise. He goes, the promise pedigree was based upon these two brothers, we just got this collection from, and they made a promise to keep the books when one of them passed away in the Korean War. So, Heritage comes up with some of these names. They just decided that Pinnacle was cool, and Hill was a location. So that name was born.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, that like of all the things to come up with on a name, just like, oh, just some random shit.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the pedigrees are a location, like the River City.
Yeah. Ohio.
I think it's the Green. I think it's the Green River pedigree, which is an interesting one. The guy that sold those books was a suspected serial killer. There's an interesting story behind the Green River pedigree.
The Green River serial killings. Yeah.
Yeah. He actually was acquitted, but he was the main suspect for a while.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that really makes your collection go up in value after your passing, right?
Yeah.
When you're infamous like that.
Yep.
That's insane. So have you been involved in actually finding any pedigrees?
I mean, yes and no. Like I said, the River City, I mean, I bought a number of those books, and then all of a sudden it just disappeared. And then a year later, I figure out it became a pedigree. I'm like, well, I know where that one came from, because a lot of these pedigrees were sold through normal channels before CGC came around. So I bought a number of White Mountain back in the day when you can buy them through the auction like Christie's and Sotheby's.
Yeah.
I bought a number of these books before they became pedigrees, like the River City pedigree. I mean, the ones I just showed you that certificate, the Elmhurst, there was 7,000 books. Now I doubt it became a pedigree. I haven't seen a pedigree status for books from that era, but I could have definitely claimed a pedigree status in that collection if I wanted to, and knew who to contact back in 2004.
Yeah.
But I've never really brought a pedigree to market. I've been able to take a crack at it before it gets discovered, essentially. Probably I can think of 3 different pedigrees that I bought into, and then eventually the owner goes, "Oh, whoa, this is a pedigree collection." It's very common that the owners will sell bits and pieces of the collection, so you don't see like an iceberg. You don't see the true, size of the books until you see, a bunch come in, and then more come in, and then more come in, and then you go, "Oh my God, this is a significant amount of books." It's very common that happens.
Yeah. Oh, I can appreciate that. So what have you got for us here?
So, we talked about pedigrees, we talked about file copies, and then there's that, our collection, of, then there's the file copies, and that's what this latter one falls into. It's interesting because there's been a number of big warehouse finds. They call them file copies, and these are a few that I picked up about 8-9 years ago.
I know that the somebody was flashing around like was it a Bob Kane file copy of something as well?
Yeah, Mike Carbonara had the file copy pulled out of the binder. He was showing that around in a couple of recent shows.
That's right, yeah.
But yeah, this right here, there's a couple of, and there's actually in the background, there's 2 of the same issue.
So we got Tomb of Terror number 16 and Witch's Tale. Is that 12, 13?
Let me see here. It is number 13.
13, Witch's Tale 3.
So there's 2 of those. So these are all file copies. I got these a few years ago before they exploded. The issue before this one, of course, is the infamous plutonium cover. The guy's face is melting off. Issue 15. This is 16.
That's crazy.
It's about a 9.2. And again, this came through a dealer out of Ohio, and he got a collection of books. And he was selling these off, and he said they're all from the file, or the Harvey file copy grouping collection. So it doesn't really garner a, I guess you could probably get a CGC label put on these. And actually, I do have.
I think they do make a notation on the label that it's actually, a file copy.
You're right, they do.
Yeah.
I think I've got one. Yep, I've got one right here. Let me share this here once it comes up. But yeah, they will put down that it's a file copy. So that kind of falls into that collection of, you'll get a little note on the label indicating that it was a file copy. And here's kind of a quirky book I'm sharing around, Dark Shadows, and
This
it
one's right
has,
up TJ's alley.
yep, from the Random House archives, kind of a little out of focus there, and they'll have the word file copy over here. But again,
Yeah,
you
old
could
labels.
argue, was this original owner collection? Yeah, it's the publisher's collection basically, but by and large, publishers don't have warehouses full of golden age books anymore. So this kind of meets that criteria of it's a vintage collection. So I think it's
Mhm.
that shades of gray where it's original owner, sort of, it's a publisher, it's kind of vintage.
Yeah.
Um, but in file copies, very common file copies like the Random House archives and the Harvey file copies, they were very narrow years and they had, hundreds of copies in some cases of these books. So the breadth isn't there. It's a near miss basically, but you do get the notation on the label that it was a file copy. So
That's
I've got
cool.
I've got quite a few of those file copies laying around here because they're cheap. They're, the keys have long since been slabbed and sold off, but they're nice high grade copies you can pick up from time to time.
Nice.
Yep.
So TJ was asking, have we discussed how the Mile High 2 lost its pedigree status? Now, we did talk about how it was a collection because of the
Yeah.
age.
Yep.
So was it identified as a pedigree initially and then dropped?
So I believe it wasn't a recognized. So CGC has kind of become the de facto clearinghouse for pedigree statuses in the recent years.
Mhm.
Matt Nelson, basically came up with that section on the CGC site that has all of the pedigree information. I think at one point, there was that gray area of what's a pedigree, what's a collection, and for the longest time, they kind of got lumped together, especially in the '90s. Any large collection of a high enough condition and significance was considered a pedigree, but they were getting flooded. I mean, there was literally probably 100 so-called pedigrees in the late '90s, and I think CGC kind of clarified to say a pedigree has to have these four qualities: condition, original owner, size of the collection, and a vintage. So that eliminated a lot of other collections,
Mm.
file copies. And I think the Mile High for a while, Chuck Rosansky pushed that Mile High 2 for quite some time. And it was a huge, I mean, it was, I think, a million or more issues that he bought. But again, they were from the 70s onwards, like into the 80s.
Well, and
And
also they
some of
were a
them,
warehouse find, not really an actual curated collection from
right.
a
It was
single
it was
user
a
or a single
publisher. And
person. Yeah.
yeah, Chuck has a pretty good story on that. The guy that owned that was in some shady business, and I guess the mafia was after this guy for some money, and he needed some quick cash, so Chuck bought the collection, and it wasn't, the condition wasn't quite there. They were stored in a warehouse. The copies on the top, they literally walked across the top of these books. They had a warehouse stacked up, and Chuck had pictures. They were stacked like 20 feet, 30 feet high in the warehouse, and you had to walk across the top of these bundles of books. So the books in the top were pretty beat up.
Oh,
So yeah, condition, era, the age, and it wasn't quite original owner, technically speaking. So I think CGC said, nah, this is not a pedigree status. So it kind of lost. It never had it to begin with, but like I said, back in the '90s and earlier, there was no differentiation between a collection and a pedigree.
fair enough. I'm gonna pop into a section that I like to call four color investment. So
Mm,
I wanna ask the question: how do pedigree or collection comics play into the investment marketplace? Right.
mhm.
So and I think that this is a valuable question, particularly since that Promise collection went buck wild. Right. We had
Yeah.
last year we had a significant increase in not just the I'll say value, but the selling price of comics, in general, particularly key issues and such, that was, a lot more across the marketplace.
Mhm.
Um, but when that Promise collection hit Heritage, what we noticed was like a stall in everything else, right? While all the money went into these
Yeah.
books, right? And there was,
Yeah.
you know, highest sales of a book of that grade ever, because it was, part of a pedigree. So
Mhm.
in the resale market going over time, over years into the future, right, you've got two books of the same grade. Does the pedigree garner some kind of bump, where
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it, it, it gets a premium? You know, or
Absolutely. Yeah. And the roots of that are back in the Mile High Pedigree, because back in 77, I recall seeing some of these ads around. I was 8, 9 years old, and Chuck was selling the books because he didn't have enough cash. So I think Chuck had to raise $3,000 initially to buy the
yeah.
first chunk of books, and he was broke. He didn't have the money.
Oh yeah, he
Um,
was living out of his car, damn near.
and there's a few people. I remember David Alexander was one of them, the dentist,
Yeah,
the so-called dentist who has
yeah.
the
The guy
Mile
who
High
bought all
copies.
he bought the funny animal books and stuff like that
Yeah,
off of them,
yeah.
like
He
right
also
off the
has
top.
Action Comics #1. He had a couple of copies of Superman #1 until recently. He owned the Mile High copy that just sold for 5.3 million, and
Holy
supposedly his
shit.
copy, David's copy, is nicer than that. He kept the better of several copies. So imagine having, like, I don't know, 4 copies of Superman #1 and then discarding the Mile High copy because it was, your under copy. But anyway, a bunch of guys bought a couple of books from Chuck in the early days, and Chuck
Yeah,
advertised other ones in the Comic Buyer's Guide back then.
yeah, I remember that.
And it was funny because back then the grading was essentially 3 grades: good, fine, and near mint. Well,
Hmm.
when the Mile High books came out, Chuck called them gem mint because nobody had really seen mint books until then.
Yeah,
And if you were to buy, like, a mint book, it was probably about a VF nowadays by today's standards. So if
sure.
you were to buy a Mile High copy back in the 70s, you knew you were getting the best of the best. You were getting a true, in some cases, a mint 9.8 book. So a lot of dealers paid a premium knowing that it came from that collection. Up until I think the mid 90s, late 90s, Steve Geppy, who used to own Diamond Publishing,
Diamond, yeah.
he just retired. He advertised he was paying 2.5 times over street for any Mile High book automatically, no
Wow.
argument. So you knew that there was a premium built into those books. So to get a pedigree status meant your collection was worth a lot more instantly. Hence, CGC kind of clamping down on the what makes a pedigree book.
Sure.
So, just having that pedigree status, I think, tells most collectors that you're getting the best of the best, and you want to make sure that your pedigree, when you're given that, is not a mid grade to low grade collection. It's basically the highest quality it's out there. So, absolutely, pedigrees do demand a higher value. The synergy, like with the Promise collection, when I was talking to Ed Alon about this last year, they said the biggest challenge they have is trying to sell this slow enough to not drain the market. Because as you
Yeah.
mentioned, when these books come out, collectors don't have infinite funds. They appear to be infinitely funded in some cases, but you got to be careful not to flood the market. So they've been selling these things intentionally, as they come back in groupings to avoid, draining the buyers from all the money they have. But it definitely has had an impact on other areas of buying. I've seen other bargains popping up because people are flocking over to buy those Promise books.
Right, and these are like quarterly auctions that these are going up for, right?
Right. And they do their Sunday auctions. They still have Promise books in the Sundays. And the same thing with that MLJ collection I had last year. They said we have to be a little bit careful because there are so few MLJ collectors out there that if you dump all this at once, you're not going to get the best value
True.
for the books. You got to put it out there in smaller batches.
Yeah.
But yeah, so definitely pedigree status does bring a premium to the market. That name, whatever the pedigree is, you got a pretty good idea it's going to be the best of the best.
So true. So, Alex, we were having a conversation about this
On the
today.
treadmill.
No, he actually goes out running. Like he actually leaves the house. So like kudos to him. But we were just talking because I'm like one of the things I like about doing this show is that like I can take this and I can convert this over, and this is going to end up on a lot of the podcast platforms as well, right? Because like Alex has popped in a number of different streams that I've done, and it's like it's always going to be one of those things where it's like we really have to be descriptive, in
Yes.
how we're having these conversations, right? Because it's like, what's the book? What is it? What are we talking about? Yeah,
I know
be
it all
very
too well.
descriptive. You're gonna have to roll back. We're coming up on the end of this, Alex. So, but
So I'm an avid runner too. I do a lot of competitive runs, and I just squeezed my running before because I had to be here in person. I couldn't do this while I jogged, so I know the struggle. It's real.
So TJ says there's a pretty big premium swing between Mile High and Don Rosa. Well,
Just a
obviously
little bit.
one's a pedigree and one's a collection, right?
Yes.
So we do have that going on for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Don actually, I'll tell you this right now. Don contacted me. I've talked to Don on and off over the years. He contacted me about 4 years back, and he goes, do me a favor. He goes, stop selling those Don Rosa books on eBay, because I had a whole bunch of us selling Don Rosa books on eBay. And I go, why? And he goes, I'm trying to buy back some of my artwork. And every time I search for Don Rosa, I see 100 listings of my old crap for sale. So I had to stop selling Don's books for a little bit.
That's rough.
Yeah.
He's trying to buy back his own pages.
Yeah.
Well, the struggle is real. Well, that's good. And Mike, I want to thank you for coming on here and having this conversation with us. And I hope that everybody who's watched or listened to this is gained some insight into how these things are done and what's available, what's out there, and changes to how they approach their comic book collecting. Either from an investment portfolio standpoint, or even just something that's fun to have in their collection. TJ says Don Rosa is a true pedigree. Very cool. But I want to give you an opportunity here. Do you have anything coming up? Anything you want to showcase or announce? Or
yeah, absolutely. So I do my own local show. I finally decided, enough's enough. I'm tired of going to these. I'll call them fun cons. I do 20, 30 shows a year as an attendee. And rarely do I find nowadays a convention that truly has like a depth and breadth of comics. So I said, you know what? I'll just make my own. So I have twice a year, call it the Empire Comic Fest. I'm talking to a few guests right now. I just talked to, and I can announce this, I'm talking to Mike Grell. He'll be coming up. We have a few more special guest artists. It'll be July 16th in Rochester, New York. So it's growing leaps and bounds. It was wall-to-wall people. We had over 700 last July, or November,
Wow.
sorry. We did our first show last July. Our second show is November. So our third one this year, July 16th, EmpireComicFest.com. We're packing the vendors in. I'm talking to a number of bigger businesses at the moment, try to get people to come in and do some collaborative work with some of the bigger industry people. But it's all comics, and a couple of artists. And I do a couple of small shows as a seller. I'm doing one out in Buffalo end of April called Decepticon. That'll be, I think, April 30th. And other than that, I'm always at a convention. You've seen me at Chicago. I travel quite a lot. I go to maybe 30 shows local and across the U.S. just as a buyer.
So
and of course, I'm all over Patrick, Luther Manning's channel, and
Sure.
On the IG boards too with sellingcomics.com.
And the CGC boards as well, right? Your Alpha _ Omega.
Yeah.
Like every time you get new stuff, like this is how you find out what he gets before you see the Luther Manning video. Like you got to follow him on the CGC boards because stuff gets posted because there's editing time.
This is a first world problem. So I've spanned the era of I go back to the dial-up modem days, really back to '83. So I've got so many accounts. You can't keep up. You can't have a consistent name.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Your identity's got to change every now and then.
Yeah. First world problem. So I joined the CGC boards back, I think, in 2001. I think I'm member 20. I'm pretty early on. So my name over there was Alpha Omega. And of course, you don't think of this stuff in hindsight, but that was 22 years ago. So yeah, unfortunately, my name is a little different. I'm trying to be consistent and make that easy to find name wherever I'm at. So very true.
You're killing us, Alex. You're really killing us, man.
I was 1 in 83.
I was 9. So
my first Comic-Con was 1983. I met George Perez. It was 83. I was in like 8th grade, I think. And I walked up to George and I said, "So what books do you sell?" And he gave me a look and he goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, this is a Comic-Con, right? You sell comics." And he goes, "No." And I had
make the comics, boy.
I had heard of George. I know he did Teen Titans, but I never knew that artists attended Comic-Cons. It was my first show. So that was back in '83.
Yeah. Walk up to Jack Kirby and ask him, "Hey, do you sell comics?"
I've met Jack a few times. He used to walk around the shows. I've met Stan many a times back in the days when they used to just walk the floor. They didn't charge $100. You just walked up and chatted for a few minutes.
Nice.
Those were the days.
So it's Empire Comic Fest, is that right?
EmpireComicFest.com is the website, and
It's July 16th
July
in
16th.
Rochester, New York, right?
Yep. We actually there's no admission. I mean, as a Comic-Con attendee, I hate paying that money to get in, and then there's nothing to buy. So what do I want? I want comics. I want free parking. I want easy access. We're pulling all the stops out for this show. So we're even thinking about paying people to attend for the next show, believe it or not. And that's serious.
Please come.
Yeah, we're paying people. So if you want to show up, we'll pay you some money.
If you want to pay my gas money, I'll drive out there.
No, we're not doing reimbursements. No, seriously though, we have this new idea we're trying out where if you want to show up, we'll give you convention bucks. Basically, it's a voucher to go in and spend at the show. So we'll hand them out. In lieu of swag bags, you get some convention bucks to spend at the show for any vendor table. And what's better than a free con? A con that pays you.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
And I love the idea. I mean, like, because the shows that I do, kind of locally, it's, there's comics, there's pops, there's toys, it's just kind of a free for all, you get tables, you get a lot of different people coming through there. But yeah, I mean, as a digger, like you want to be able to go to a con that like I'm there for the comics, right? And I want to go find some gold. But it's great. And then your website is sellingcomics.com.
Correct. Yep. You can reach me there through my social media page. I think everything is up to date. So if you're getting lost in what alias I have on what platform, just go to sellingcomics.com. The About Me page, social media has all my contact information there. And
all that same information is also listed in the description of this show. So
awesome.
If you forget where it is, just go ahead and pop back on here, and you can click on it and find that information. He's available on Instagram as well. Thank you, Mike, again for an excellent conversation and for being able to pop in here at short notice.
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure hanging out with you and talking to you.
And and I'll add too, if people want to do another follow-up, if we want to talk more about pedigrees, you got questions, maybe you think you have a pedigree book in your collection, feel free to do a follow-up show and we can answer some questions on name that pedigree.
Absolutely. And welcome to have anybody throw some comments out there. Let's hear about it. Let's find out about your pedigree or about the books in your collection, because we love talking about comic books. Alex says I'm going to trip browsing the site as I run. Focus, buddy. Focus. Stay focused.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for us tonight. Thank you, everybody who came out and watched and listened, and for everybody who's tuning in to the show afterwards on the rewind. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.